In 2007, the leadership of a large, well-known organization had a problem. Their customer service was not keeping pace with their customers' expectations. They knew they had to act. Oh, did they ever? As part of their 87-page strategic transformation plan, they wrote, and I quote, "Customers form expectations on critical attributes, such as waiting time in line, based on their experience with similar services, and compare our performance to best-in-class providers." Look, if you're not fluent in corporate speak, let me translate. Customers were upset at having to spend time waiting online. To address the issue, the leadership devised a bold solution. They removed the clocks from the walls of all of their retail locations. No, really, that's what the leadership of the United States Postal Service did. They took the clocks out of all their 37,000 post offices. Now, amazingly, banishing the clocks did not make customers happier about wait times. What were those leaders thinking? Now, maybe they just forgot that all those customers in line would have cell phones with clocks, or watches, or both. Or maybe they thought by removing the clock, people would be mesmerized by the beauty of a blank beige wall. Or maybe, with no clock on the wall, they thought people might suddenly think they were in some kind of postal casino. When I get up to that counter, I'm going to put all my money on international stamps. Oh, those pretty ones with the colorful flags. In any event, removing the clocks set off a customer backlash, which really should come as no surprise because you and I both know that removing clocks to address wait times is ridiculous. It is a decision incredibly disconnected from its eventual result. It's hard to believe that the leadership of the United States Postal Service could be so disconnected and so ineffective. And yet, the sad truth is most leaders are disconnected and ineffective. As an example, Ketchum, a public relations firm, surveys 25,000 people around the world each year and asks them, "What do you think about your leaders?" Turns out that only 23% believe their leader leads well. And by the way, that number has not been above 25% for the last 5 years. So, yes, the overall state of leadership is poor. However, there is a silver lining in the data. See, there's 23% who are leading well. So what do they do differently? What do they know that the other 77% don't? I got my first big clue to the answer, literally handed to me as a present about 20 years ago. So I was having lunch with my leadership mentor, Jeff. And Jeff and I would meet for lunch every month or so and talk shop about leadership and life. And on this particular day, as we're finishing up, Jeff hands me this present and says, "Congratulations on last weekend." You see, the weekend before, I'd just gotten certified to lead a very complex training I'd spent years preparing for, and Jeff had mentored me through the process. So I open up the box, and inside there is this T-shirt. At that moment, I felt really seen and acknowledged. I mean, Jeff was like a father figure to me, so this was a really special moment. And then, with his bald head shining in the fluorescent light, Jeff gets this impish grin on his face. He says, "Oh, turn the shirt around. Turn it around." I'll never forget what he said next. He said, "Alain, welcome to leadership. As a leader, you're always a target. Now, if you're a great leader, you're the target of people's trust, their respect, their admiration. But if you're a lousy leader, you'll be the target of people's disappointment, their criticism, and their blame. As a leader, you're always a target. Now, what type of target? That's your choice. It depends on the quality of connection that you create with someone else. At its core, leadership is about connection. It's a relationship between two people. And what Jeff, with his t-shirt, understood intuitively about leadership and connection is actually rooted in neuroscience and biology. It's how we are wired. So, this is your brain. Okay, it's not actually your brain, but it's a simplified representation of a human brain. And the human brain is divided into three parts. So the first part is the reptilian brain, which is the oldest of the three from an evolutionary perspective. So the reptilian brain controls functions like breathing, heart rate, digestion. These are all things that you don't need to think about for them to keep working. Right, thank goodness. Right, then is the next oldest, which is the limbic brain, which is responsible for things like emotion, motivation, and behavior. And then finally, there's the newest part of the brain, the neocortex. Now, this is the part that allows you to do all sorts of incredible things that other species can't. Things like ride a bicycle, paint a self-portrait, or write a love letter. So here's the thing. The three parts of the brain are all interconnected. In fact, they share the same mental bandwidth, which means they're in competition for the same finite supply of your cognitive resources. But there's a catch. You see, the competition is rigged. The older parts always win. So if your reptilian brain perceives a threat, or your limbic brain feels disconnected and afraid to speak up, the neuronal traffic flows to them. They consume mental resources that might otherwise be spent on neocortical functions like strategic planning or collaboration or innovation. See, when you feel connected, you're better able to access the mental resources needed for high performance, which might explain the phenomenon as to why, when you're around some leaders, you feel competent and productive, and when you're around others, you don't. And this science has actually been borne out in the research on effectiveness. In 1974, Gallup, the world's largest polling company, wanted to find out what makes the most successful employees successful. And over the next 25 years, they surveyed over 1 million employees in over 100 countries. And after they gathered and analyzed all the data, they found there was one single factor above all others that determined an employee's success. And they defined success as higher levels of profitability, increased levels of productivity, lower levels of employee turnover, and higher levels of customer satisfaction and loyalty. Turns out that one factor that determined employee success, what was that employee's relationship with their immediate supervisor? So if you want to be a great leader, create connection. The simplest way to start is really listen to others. Seek to understand them and care how they feel. As an example, consider the story of Glenn. Glenn is a leader at a hospitality company. And Glenn and 20 of his colleagues were in a training course I was leading, and we were discussing the subject of beliefs. We were talking about how, while beliefs can feel rock solid certain, they can change. So I asked the group, is there anything that anyone once believed that you no longer believe? Now, I'd asked that question many times to many groups before, and I typically get certain responses, things like Santa Claus, the tooth fairy. So I'm expecting to hear one of those. Oh, but Glenn? Oh, he surprised me that day. Something I once believed that I no longer believe? Oh, that's an easy one. I never really liked people a whole lot. And I thought, where is this guy going? Yeah, I guess you could have called me a curmudgeon. Oh, and at work, as a manager, I was a real jerk. All I cared about was that people hit their numbers. Now, at this point, I'm thinking my entire training day is about to fall apart. But then, Glenn shifted. Yeah, all that changed 2 years ago. You see, my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And people just out of the woodwork, neighbors, parents, and my kids' friends at school just started showing up, helping, making meals, doing pickups and drop-offs. Completely restored my faith in humanity. And at work, as a manager, I realized the people on my team, well, they have families too. They have challenges too. I started asking them about their lives outside of work and really listening to them. Maybe for the first time ever. I'd like to think I'm not such a jerk anymore. Through his experience, Glenn had transformed as a person and as a leader. Glenn learned something that any of us can learn. He learned to really listen, to seek to understand, to care how others feel. Glenn learned empathy. So, empathy, it isn't just this feel-good, nice thing that you should do because someone said it's important. It's actually the smart thing to do. A recent survey of 1,000 employees found that 6 out of 10 of them would be willing to work for less money if their employer demonstrated empathy. Turns out 77% would be willing to work longer hours if their employer demonstrated empathy. And maybe even most tellingly, 92% of them said they'd be more likely to stay working for an employer if that employer empathized with their needs. Leadership is about getting others to willingly work towards a shared purpose. You can't share a purpose without connection. You can't get others to willingly work without connection. You can't lead well without connection. So, if you want to connect, be like Glenn. Seek to understand, really listen to people, care how they feel. Oh, and for goodness sake, don't take the clocks off the walls. And then you choose. What type of leader you really want to be. Thank you.